You ready? Here we go. I got this book to read about you. Yeah. Dr. Moiya McTier is both a scientist with a focus in astronomy and astrophysics and a published author with deep expertise in folklore and storytelling. Dr. McTier has given hundreds of talks around the world on a wide range of topics, from the physics of water to global eclipse rituals. Her work sits at the intersection of science and storytelling, fact and fiction, complex concepts, and chaotic creativity. Dr. McTier officially became a Doctor of the Universe in 2021 as the first Black woman to graduate from Columbia's astronomy PhD program. Overall, she has 4 Ivy League degrees. That's 4 more than me, including a joint degree in astrophysics and folklore from Harvard University. And she can be found co-hosting Fate and Fabled, a mythology show for PBS Digital Studios, as well as hosting her own podcasts. Exolore, which is about fictional world building through the science lens, and Pale Blue Pod, about astronomy for people who are afraid of the cosmos. Her debut book, which is great, The Milky Way, an autobiography of our galaxy, was named one of Publisher Weekly's best books of 2022. All of which is amazing, but wait, why is Moiya here? Well, she is also explainer-in-chief for the Human Artistry campaign, where she helps educate policymakers and fellow creatives about the promise and the risks of AI, and the ways effective AI systems depend upon a robust and lasting human creative economy. Dr. McTier's mission is to help people understand the world around us better through science, and is eager to do that across as many platforms as possible. So welcome, Dr. Moiya.
I'm a wanderer. Can I take one of these? Yeah.
Fine with you? Is that fine with you, Mel?
Can I use one of these? I'm a wanderer. Like the planets, the word planet comes from an ancient word for wanderer because they would move around the sky compared to the distant stars that seem to stay in the same place. I wasn't even planning on saying that. I just like sharing information. I think we're at the end of the talk. That's okay. That's okay. We got it. How's everyone doing? Woo! Who here has used generative AI in their work? Okay, hands down. Who here has used generative AI in their fun? Oh, interesting. Okay, hands down. Who here has been tricked by a generative AI video? Yeah, I wish I could say it happened with Sora 2, but no, it was a few weeks ago before Sora 2. It was a video of bunnies jumping on a trampoline, and it was, like 1 in the morning. I wasn't using my critical thinking skills. And ever since then, I'm realizing when I'm using the internet, I have to be using my critical thinking skills. I have to be like on level 11 with my media literacy these days. We all do. And that's something generative AI is making us practice these days. There are pros and cons to that. I'm going to be talking a lot about the pros and cons of AI today. But first I want to tell you, I guess a bit more about what Rick said, this weird intersection that I live in between astrophysics, the study of space and the universe, and folklore, the study of cultures and stories and how that has been translated from one generation to the next. As an astrophysicist, I've studied planets, I've studied stars, galaxies, the chemistry of all of those things over time. I've learned about black holes and the stories of water, eclipses. I love space. I love how much data it has. It's huge. We literally have rooms of hard drives full of data that a single human or even the 10,000 professional astrophysicists around the world would not be able to comb through themselves. We use artificial intelligence or machine learning in science to comb through our data and to help us predict things, and that is an excellent use of AI. My other side of intellectual interests is folklore, where we study rituals, holidays. What do people think is funny? What do people think is taboo? What are people afraid of? And that, I think, is a trickier use of AI. When we start integrating artificial intelligence with the very cores of what makes us human, that is where things get difficult, ethically difficult, and morally and culturally difficult. And in between these two things, there are so many ways that you can combine them. Rick mentioned Fate and Fabled. This is a bit of a shameless plug slide. Rick mentioned Fate and Fabled, where I talk about myths from around the world, and you get to see through comparative mythology how humans have been similar and how we've been beautifully diverse for the last several thousand years. The Milky Way, an autobiography of our galaxy, forced me to think like a galaxy for 2 years as I was writing it, expanding my own limited human perspectives in time and space, giving myself like galaxy brain, almost literally. And in that book, I don't get into AI because it was published in 2021 or 22, I don't know, time is weird. But since then, AI has become a bigger issue in the Milky Way and in our universe. I'm a cat mom, that's Cosmo. This makes me human, right? I have the experience of being a cat mom and loving something that would kill me in an instant if he had the chance. AI doesn't know what that is like. I host a podcast for people who are afraid of the universe. That type of connecting and empathy, AI can't do that. I want to have a very warm welcome to people who haven't had good exposure to space science before. That is something only a human can do, which is why I'm so satisfied and pleased and gratified with my work with the Human Artistry campaign, getting to talk to artists, getting to talk to policymakers, occasionally getting to talk to tech developers about the intersection of creativity and art and technology. Let's start with the creativity bit. Who here is an artist? Yay, amazing. I think as humans, we're all artists in our own ways, some more than others, some more intentional than others. Through my work with the Human Artistry campaign, I've been thinking a lot about what creativity is. Does anyone here have like a good working definition of creativity? Exactly. Exactly. Creativity is something you really only know when you see it or when you've experienced it. But it does have a long history among humans. I am especially interested in the phases of human imagination that anthropologist Richard Kearney came up with. He splits the long history of human creativity up into 3 stages. The first he called the mimetic stage, where art was not meant to be original, it was meant to be iconographic. It was meant to be a recreation of art that existed before, of pictures of deities, so that others could recognize them and worship them appropriately. This is why we know when we look at ancient Egyptian art, we know who is Ra. We know who is Apophis. They have their symbols that are always associated with them, thanks to the mimetic phase of art. During this phase, it was widely believed that we humans didn't come up with our own ideas, that any sort of creative energy we had was given to us by an external guardian spirit, a genius, if you will. For most of human history, we wouldn't have said, oh, that person is a genius. We would have said, that person has a genius who is visiting them and giving them this ability. Or maybe they have a genius that always accompanies them, and that's why that one person seems to do such great work all the time. But then we moved forward, and I do want to say that these phases overlap absolutely in time. So the next phase is the anthropocentric phase, where humans start inserting themselves into the art. This is around the 1400s maybe, where art starts becoming an act of self-expression. Artists start signing their work not just because we want to know who did it, but because they want credit for it. They want their own intellectual property to be associated with that particular piece of work. This is where some artist signatures become art themselves. Albrecht Dürer, the painter, he painted a self-portrait, and his signature is a creative piece of art. And it's during this time when we insert ourselves into the artistic process that we also remove the external genius, and we start saying, I am a genius. I am inherently more talented or smarter or better than other people who could do this same work, and it's all coming from inside of me. The third phase that Kearney identified was the parodic phase, like the Campbell's soup can paintings or Weird Al Yankovic, where your work uses other art as a vehicle to create some form of expression. Here, art doesn't have to be 100% original as long as you are adding your own unique spin on it. And through all of these phases, I think you see that creativity didn't always mean original. It didn't always mean you were coming up with something new. It didn't always mean you were responsible for the idea. But what did it mean? It meant you were responsible for the expression. Even in the mimetic phase, you were responsible for making sure you expressed your faith accurately enough to represent this deity. In the anthropocentric phase, you were responsible for expressing your lived experience in a way that could connect with another person. In the parodic phase, you were responsible for taking this other piece of art and transforming it into something that becomes incredibly your own. And so originality, not important to creativity or art, but expression definitely is. And machines cannot express. I'm willing to change my mind in the future when I'm presented with enough evidence to do so, but based on my conversations with computer scientists these days, computers are not sentient, they do not have feelings, they do not have experiences, therefore they cannot express, and they cannot create art. However, when humans and machines interact, when we use machines as tools, we can make incredible art ourselves. So for the rest of the talk, that's going to be the theme, that AI should be nothing more than a tool that we use to supplement our own creative labors. And of course, it's a big blurry line between using a tool and mis or overusing a tool. That's up to each of you to individually decide. But I want to give you a history of AI development because I think there are a lot of misconceptions about how long this has been around. People talk about AI as if it just sprung up in the last couple of years, but we're going to start this timeline all the way back in 1943. We're going back over 80 years. In 1943, two professors from the University of Chicago published a paper that mathematically described a neuron, a brain cell, for the first time. And in that paper, they weren't trying to get computers to work the same way as brains. They were trying to say that if you mathematically represent neurons in this way, you can kind of imagine how brains and machines might work in similar ways. But it's all through metaphor. Metaphor and math actually do work beautifully together, especially in these areas where we don't know the details. And we don't know the details of exactly how our brain works and comes up with new stuff. So it starts back in 1943. That's when we get terms like neural networks for the first time, where we're really comparing machines to the ways that our brains work. Then going forward in the 1950s, we have Alan Turing, who we still talk about in terms of artificial intelligence. He was really interested in imagining a machine that was indistinguishable from a person, but he was imagining it. It was 1950. This didn't exist back then. It doesn't exist today either. This is when we get artificial intelligence for the first time. There was a conference in 1956 about artificial intelligence where that term was coined. And then a few years later, in 1959, we actually start training machines to do things. At first, training them to play games like chess and checkers, and then eventually training them to do things like have rudimentary conversations with us. So this is machine learning, where the machine is presented with an obstacle like a chessboard, and through many iterations that gives it different data sets, it can learn, I'm using this in quotes, learn how to perform better in the next iteration. Then we have a long period where AI was kind of underfunded. People thought it was silly. People didn't really want to invest a lot of research and time into it. But it continued to develop. We have chatbots that are getting more popular around this time. We have some companies that have more kind of like rote automatic processes start to insert more machine learning into their procedures. In 2007, a professor at Princeton starts developing ImageNet through some competition and social pressure to get image recognition software available on the internet. And to do this, it's Dr. Fei-Fei Li. She scoured the internet for tens of thousands of images so that she could train her algorithm. And this is where we start the practice of internet scraping to get enough data to train these algorithms, because they need huge data sets to be able to recognize patterns in them that we kind of recognize implicitly. So she scraped the internet, and ImageNet became available in 2009 as an image recognition software. A few years later, in 2014, some computer scientists developed what was called a generative adversarial network. This is where we really start getting generative AI for the first time. And this works where you have two algorithms that kind of work in tandem with each other. One of the algorithms is a generator. It generates fake data sets. The other is a discriminator, and it determines how well that fake data set matches a real data set from here out in Earth. That ability to generate data sets is amazing for science. When I was studying stars in different parts of the galaxy, I needed to generate samples of stars and then compare them to the real samples out in space. It's such a powerful tool. It's so powerful that it can generate more than just ones and zeros. It can generate images and videos and sounds. So then that paved the way for ChatGPT to come out and really expose the public to AI for the first time. So we may think it started in 2022 when we all got ChatGPT, but it goes back 80 years. We really need to remember that, because if we keep thinking that AI develops so fast and it's so powerful, then we will lose hope in our way to kind of curb its expansion. All right, I want to give you a little bit about how AI works on the training and the generative ends. And this is a very simple explanation of it, because there are so many different types of AI algorithms, but they all kind of work on the same basic principle. So the purpose of artificial intelligence through programs called neural networks or deep learning is to figure out how your data works. Is to figure out what pieces of information in your data are actually interesting. What are the trends you should be paying attention to? So I'm going to use an example where we're making an algorithm that's trying to identify images, like ImageNet. So you have input data. Let's say we're trying to create an AI algorithm that can determine what picture it's seeing, right? So you give it input data. I'm really interested in cats. I told you that, that's my human interest. So you would have several pictures of different types of cats. You'd have tabbies, you'd have orange cats, you'd have the beautiful, beautiful black cats for October. You'd have them from different angles, from the side, from the front, smiling, like scowling at you because they're cats. And then you'd also have other animals in there that aren't cats. You'd have some dogs, you'd have some fish, things that you want your AI algorithm to be able to distinguish between. And you'd also have things that aren't even animals. You would put some plants in there, maybe a building. And the algorithm's job is to figure out what pieces of information can help you identify the cats in the image. So it would go through several layers of what we call neural nets. And the first layer will ask different questions than the second layer. Let's say this first layer is trying to figure out, is this an animal or not? So each of the circles in that first layer would ask a different question. How many legs does it have? Does it have fur? Does it have eyes? And all of those questions would get answered and then go through to the second layer. If it's a cat, like you've already determined it's an animal, let's now say whether or not it's a cat. You would ask, what are the shape of its ears? How big is it? How mean is it when you try to show it love? And then the third layer is trying to figure out what type of cat it is. Is it a happy cat? Is it an angry cat that's about to attack you? How many people have cats in the audience? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. Great, fantastic. So the algorithm does this series of questioning many, many times, billions of times, and it changes the data just a little bit each time to see how that affects the statistics on the output end. So you'll go through this neural network, some of the nodes will be eliminated because the question is no. If it's asking, is this a cat? Sometimes the answer is going to be no. So that data won't pass through to the next layer in the network. So in this way, you cut out valuable data points, or you cut out the non-valuable data points, just leaving the ones that are useful to you. Eventually, you have a set of data to pay attention to, like the number of whiskers or the size of it. And you also have things that you don't need to pay attention to. If you're trying to figure out whether or not something's a cat, you don't need to ask where it went to school. Right? Like, there are some questions that just aren't relevant here. And the point of the AI network is to figure out which questions are relevant and which ones aren't through many, many iterations. And on the output end, what you get is a labeled data set where it looks at your data. It labels, this is a cat, this isn't a cat, this is a mushroom. And then you can check the accuracy of that labeled data set and start the whole process again to train it to be better. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, yeah?
Is this where computer vision starts to come in?
Is this where computer vision starts to come in? Yeah, that can be a part of it, where the computer vision would have gone through many iterations to figure out what types of sites to pay attention to. Okay, cool. So that's training. On the generating end, you just do that multiple times. On the generating end, an AI, generative artificial intelligence algorithm is really just a big pattern recognizer. If you give it enough data, that data will have trends in it, mathematical, statistically significant trends that it can find through that neural network process. And then generating something is just a matter of essentially following the formula for the trends that you've identified. And this is why I think so much of generated content feels flat, because it's formulaic. Like, we can tell when a writer or a song producer is just kind of going through the motions. That's what AI is doing. It's going through the motions. And it's finding the holes and then predicting what is going to fill that hole. And we are so good at this. We all know how to do this. We'll do it right now. The mitochondria is?
The powerhouse of the cell.
Okay, some of you got that. And you know what? Some generative artificial intelligences are faster because they've been trained on some of those models, right? So the ones who answered, you've been trained on the biology model. What about this one?
Shampoo.
Shampoo. Yeah, you know the pattern. If someone knocks on your door with, yeah, you know exactly what to do. We can also do this with images. When we see something missing, we can fill it in with our eyes to make it a full picture. And generative AI can do something very, very similar. Okay, so that's how AI works. Now I'm going to get into like the ethics and stuff, which is why I'm here. And there are some things that AI is good for. I like to be very clear about the fact that there are different types of AI algorithms. I spend a lot of time talking about generative AI, but all of the times I've enjoyed using AI, it was not generative. It was analytical. It was combing through the data that I used for my astronomy research. So in generative AI, there are definitely some good uses. Any sort of customization, say you're a musician and you want to have a song where one of the verses in the song can be specifically about a listener. We can all individually decide if we're comfortable with that, but there are definitely musicians who would want to do that, and if they give permission for their art to be used in that way, it's a totally ethical use of their music and AI. And so getting that kind of personalized connection, which we all want as artists with our audience, AI can really help us do that. It can also help restore and mix and bring things back from the dead sometimes. The last Beatles song came out in 2022, or 2023, I think, and it used old recordings of John Lennon and Ringo Starr and combined them with new recordings from the surviving Beatles and then released the last Beatles song. Have you listened to it? Do you like it? I see some nods. Yeah. I see some people said like, yes, I listened to it, and then did not answer whether they liked it. So that also is some interesting data. But that's a really powerful use of AI. It can give voices back to the voiceless. Randy Travis is now able to perform because he trained an AI algorithm on his voice after he lost it through a medical emergency. It can also be really good at translating voices so that, if I were to sing a song, I can't speak Spanish, I can't speak French, but an AI could be used to translate my voice into those other languages so that French speakers are still hearing me sing the song. Not that anyone would want to hear me sing the song, but I think you get where I'm going. For analytical artificial intelligence, it's really good at combing through large sets of data. The first picture we ever took of a black hole required dozens of terabytes of data per week, and we observed it for months. These data sets in astronomy are huge. Data sets with people are not so astronomically large, but still bigger than one person wants to comb through themselves. So that's really good for AI. And personalized recommendations. Say you go to a really, really big museum and you only have an hour, you want to know what you want to hit first. You can type it into some sort of chat bot and it will map out a route for you based on your own interests. So there are good uses of AI, but we have to be very, very careful because there are also a lot of limits and concerns when it comes to AI. The first is that there's no guaranteed accuracy with generative AI. It's a predictor. I know we all have been burned by autocorrect before. Generative AI is a really fancy autocorrect. And it cares more about the perception of accuracy than actual accuracy, which is why it really crushes my soul when people use ChatGPT as a search engine, because it will tell you what it thinks, in quotes, you want to hear, or what it thinks you expect to hear. Sometimes, especially when you ask a prompt to create some sort of music or visual piece, it legally cannot be too accurate to what you ask. If you ask it to make you a song that sounds like the Beatles, it can only be so Beatle-like before it's like undeniably copyright infringement. And even before that, like it's definitely copyright infringement, but people have some plausible deniability. It's also an issue because the training set matters so much in generative AI. If you train a model only on Western canon of literature, and then you ask it to make a story, it is not going to generate a story with a protagonist that is anything like me. If you ask some predictive AI algorithms to tell you who in this hospital is going to make the fastest recovery, it again is not going to point at someone who looks like me. There are human prejudices that are baked into generative AI algorithms and predictive AI algorithms because those prejudices are baked into the data of our real world. There's so many examples I could give you, but I do just want to get to it. Yeah, I want to get to this. This book recommendation, AI Snake Oil, really does a good job at explaining the pitfalls to predictive AI algorithms in housing, in medicine, in jobs, in policing. I think predictive AI is a better use than generative AI, just because it's less murky, I think, but it still has murk. Those waters are not clear. I also want to recommend Dr. Emily Bender and Dr. Alex Hanna's book, The AI Con, but I didn't get to put it up on the slide. And Dr. Bender has a really good podcast about AI. She's a computational linguist, and so she is, I think, in a really prime position to be skeptical of this technology. But now we also have to get into the copyright of it all. I think, especially from the Human Artistry campaign's perspective, the biggest issue with generative AI is that it is trained on copyrighted works without permission from the people who created them. Oh, I forgot to add that in. That's okay, you can see it early. So we have a scattering of AI laws around the country. When you pass state borders, the AI laws change, and that shouldn't be the case because technology is the same no matter what state you're in. For example, one of the holes in our protections against generative AI is the right of publicity, which is also sometimes confusingly called the right of privacy. It's your ability to control how your name, image, voice, and likeness, the way your face looks, how those things are used. Right now, there's no federal right of publicity. It's state by state. So if someone makes an AI deepfake of you in Michigan, and it's not doing anything like really illegal, you don't necessarily have any recourse because they don't have a right of publicity. You do not get to control how your likeness is used in Michigan, but you do get to control how it's used in Tennessee. How does that make sense? You're the same person in Michigan and Tennessee. And so we need these kind of like federal protections. We also need commitment from the companies that they're going to be transparent. There are, where do I want to go? Right now, we have a very pro-AI environment in the country, and so it's unclear how the legal battles are going to go going forward and how the policies are going to go going forward. But in Europe, at least, there's a lot of promise. The EU AI Act made sure that transparency was necessary, so anything generated with artificial intelligence is labeled as being generated by AI, which is good. We want that here too. But here, AI is kind of like the Wild West. I've talked to some musicians who have said, this is the Wild West, this is the gold rush. You have to go in and use it and make all your money now before there are regulations put in place. So this is the mindset that some people have. And if you want to keep up to date on the many, many legal cases and policies coming down the pipeline for AI, here are two resources. The Copyright Alliance is really paying a lot of attention, especially to the copyright cases, which is good. And the Oric AI Law Center is looking at policies. And so they have lists of laws by state, so you can look it up for Florida specifically if you want to. But my passion, one thing I've been so excited to do over the last couple of years, is protect artists in this context, and there are a few ways that we can do it. Oh no, I have more lawsuit stuff. Yes, okay, right. Some of these lawsuits for the copyright infringement, they claim, the AI side claims that it's an okay use of copyrighted material because it's fair use. It falls under the fair use doctrine. Are there legal people in the room? How many people here know fair use well? Okay, so it's worth explaining, great. Something is considered fair use and therefore not copyright infringement if it meets these, some of these criteria, and it's always analyzed on a case-by-case basis because the Copyright Office knows that this is complicated stuff. So something is considered fair use of copyrighted material if it's not for commercial purposes, like if you're not trying to make money off of someone else's work, if you're trying to teach people, if you're trying to perform a public good, then it's probably fair use. If it doesn't completely step on the creative intention of the original piece, if you're clearly trying to say something new, if it is a parody, right? If you're participating in Kearney's third stage of human imagination, then it's a fair use, which is why Weird Al has had such a thriving career. And then you have to take into account how much of the original was used, like, you know, did they use a corner of the image? Did they use one verse of the song? Something like that. And then the effect on the market potential. Does this use of a copyrighted work make it more difficult for the original to perform under capitalism? Like, will this use make it harder for the other work to be bought or sold? Typically, the reason the generative AI content does not fall under fair use is because it was new, right? So I think you run into fair use issues more with generated stuff than with the analytical AI stuff. It is cases. Oh, something interesting that I would love to talk about. The courts move slowly. So sometimes artists have to take matters into their own hands, and there are some ways that technology can be used to fight back against technology. Nightshade and Glaze from UChicago, which is so appropriate since UChicago professors published that first neural networks paper, they are developing some programs that you can use to make your work uningestible by AI. So Nightshade is an appropriate name. And of course, one way that we can push back is through coalitions of artists, like the Human Artistry campaign, which is a coalition. It's not, like a company. It is a collective of creative organizations, more than 200 of them, from around the world. We represent more than 40 countries. And it was started by the Recording Industry Association of America, so definitely focuses heavily on music, but I love that any creative profession can be a part of the campaign. We represent athletes, photographers, writers, actors, anyone who uses creativity in their work. We want to protect them. And all of these 200 plus groups are united under a set of artist-centric principles. We all agree that AI is a tool and nothing more, like a synthesizer or a looper or a camera, right? We still have to maintain all of the creative choices that an artist should make in the space. But there are tasks that the AI can do for us, like mixing and mastering, maybe, if you're a musician. There are several of the principles that are all around transparency on the input and output sides of the AI. On the output side, if something is generated, it needs to be labeled as generated. I don't want to have to use my media literacy skills on 11 all the time. I want watermarks. Humans have never had to question our perception in this way before. The only time we've ever had to do that is in nightmares and in ghost stories that we would tell around fires of monsters who steal your face and voice. This is not natural for us, and so we shouldn't have to do the work of asking ourselves every time we see a video, is this AI? Oh no. Okay, and on the input side, we need to know what copyrighted works were used to train these AI algorithms so that those artists who created those works can be fairly compensated and credited for their contribution. Of course, that should only happen after those artists give consent for their works to be used in the model. It should be an opt-in situation, not opt-out. Over the last couple of years, the campaign has been working really hard on getting some legislation passed in DC. The one we've been having the most success with is called the No Fakes Act. This would be that federal right to protect how your name, image, voice, and likeness are used. And it has bipartisan support because no one wants a deep fake made of them. Like, no one in Washington wants a deep fake made of them. So I really do believe that we can get the No Fakes Act passed through. It applies to all Americans, not just celebrities. And it would give you the ability to sue and get deep fakes and voice clones of yourself taken down. The next thing we're really going to try and get passed is something called the TRAIN Act, which answers that transparency question. This would get us closer to the EU AI Act of having training data labeled and generated output labeled. And then finally, the campaign's trying to get a lot of buy-in from AI companies. BandLab has committed to having ethical practices where they only train their model on works that either they own or that they've had permission to use. And there are a few other companies that are doing this. 11 Labs is one I've heard of. If you want to start playing around with your own AI-generated stuff, you can train it on like your own face and then give permission for other people to use if you want. So based on what the campaign has put forth in its principles, and based on my conversations with artists, there are definitely practices that you can use, ethical practices, to help you inform your AI choices going forward. The first is that if you're going to use AI, check in on how that AI was trained. Look at the company, see if they pay their artists, see if they got consent from their artists first. And if they didn't, try not to use it. I know no ethical consumption under whatever, right? But try as hard as you can, because you don't have to use AI. This is a choice you can make. And you can also choose not to use it if you know it wasn't made ethically. So yeah, check if they credit and compensate their artists. Tess is one that has committed to only training their model on licensed material. Adobe Firefly, although they do have a lot of unlicensed material in their training set just because other people have uploaded it, so it's not completely pure, I would say. And 11 Labs is one I've learned about since I made the talk. You can also train your own AI model. I know that some of the companies have that option for you. That's a better way to go, but if you're using one of these, make your own AI algorithms from like Midjourney or OpenAI or something, you should know that your training that you do is really just for fine tuning. The base of the model was still trained on copyrighted works without permission, so use that with a grain of salt. Yes. And when you're generating something new, it's going to be more ethically dubious than if you are analyzing a data set that already exists. So when you go into a situation where you might use AI, really ask yourself, should you? What are you using it for? Is it replacing your creative labor, or is it augmenting and improving it? And be really intentional in your choices there. Over the last 2 years working with the Human Artistry campaign, I have learned that there is no one opinion about AI. Every artist I've talked to feels a little bit differently about how they want to use it and how they want it to use their work. Artists also vary in what they think creativity is and what they think art is. Not even just across artistic disciplines. You know, I've talked to so many musicians who feel differently about AI in mixing and mastering, AI in beat making, AI in songwriting, and that surprised me. I didn't think it would be that varied when I started working with the campaign. And so I have kind of changed my simplest answer to how to engage with AI ethically. Before I would have had this like long list of rules, but I think now my answer is just maximize choice. The most ethical AI system, with the assumption that AI already exists, the most ethical AI system is one where everyone in it gets to choose exactly how they engage with AI. That means they get to choose if they consume AI content, because if something comes up, it's labeled AI and they can just swipe away from it. It also means that we all get to choose how our work is used in an AI model. Personally, I don't want it to touch my stuff ever, and I know it has, and I'm mad about it. So mad, because especially what Rick said about being a unique artist, my form of art is writing. I'm a creative writer, but I'm a nonfiction creative writer. So I'm presenting facts which are not copyrightable, but I'm presenting them in a style that I hope is unique to me. I wrote a book from the perspective of the Milky Way galaxy. My next book is from the perspectives of the muses from Greek mythology, and they're all presenting facts, which the AI can use, fine. But it boils my blood to think that someone can type in, write a story in the style of Moiya McTier, and it might shoot out a story written from the perspective of a proton or something. Like, I don't like that. And in a perfect system, we would all get to choose whether or not that happens to us. Courts take a long time, the policy takes a long time, the lawsuits take a long time to clear out. So we have to not rely on them to be our moral and ethical compasses. It is up to us to be ethical in these AI streets. I did say that, I did. Okay, so over the last 2 years, as I've been thinking about artistry and creativity and what it really means to our society, I have written a book that is a history of creativity from the perspectives of the Greek muses. And they say a lot of the things I've said here, that art is an act of expression, but they also say other important things that didn't fit neatly in this talk, like culture and stories and art are the only way that our society has survived. Art gets us through hard times, it's gotten us through revolution, it's taught us everything we know. Through stories, through drawings, through the science. Creativity is so valuable to us, and it is a uniquely human experience, and so we should keep it that way. Thank you all so much for listening. Time for questions. Yeah, I don't know how long that took.
It took about the right amount of time, but we started early.
Any questions? Yeah, I see you.
So I'm a filmmaker, and recently there have been some social campaigns, I'd say, that bring our attention to software that might deliver files to a screening, like WeTransfer.
Ooh.
But in the consent, the use of the license, for instance, there might be a little box that you may or may not check off that says, yes, you may use my intellectual property. And so there's a grassroots campaign from other makers to say, do not use this service anymore. You see that kind of groundswell of grassroots working in tandem with what you're describing.
I love that, yeah. We need more groundswell, grassroots commitment. Like I said, the courts aren't going to decide things fast enough, so we have to, with our own voices and behaviors, say how we feel about AI. That's disgusting. That is a disgusting practice. And unfortunately, we don't all have the privilege of saying, well, no, I'm not going to use WeTransfer, like we have to. Now I'm going to talk to the people at the campaign and see if we can do something about that. Yeah, because that's not okay. But yeah, if we could all individually be louder and more staunch with our decisions about AI, then I think that makes a difference. I've started putting in all of my contracts that they are not allowed to use any recordings or any piece of me to train AI. Yes, in the back.
I'm going to come up with this microphone.
Thanks.
I'm curious. So I noticed a theme that when we begin to talk about these issues that we're confronting with the rapidly developing thing we call artificial intelligence right now, we blame artificial intelligence. We say AI is the problem. Even in your talk today, it's artificial intelligence does this, artificial intelligence. It's the way we phrase it. It's convenient. It's a sort of shorthand. How do you think? Thinking about this from a storytelling perspective, the stories we're telling ourselves. Because the reality is, AI did none of that. Humans did almost all of it. And large companies did all of it. And I think right now in our culture, we're struggling with something culturally about the way we make sense of things. And I think there's a danger, especially as AI becomes more intelligent, the possibility of general intelligence approaching us very quickly, that we'll very soon begin to do to yet another intelligent creature what we've done to most intelligent creatures on the planet, which is to treat them as if they're fundamentally different than us, that we raise ourselves above them, and then we tell ourselves the story that it's not our responsibility what's happened there. And I wonder, how do you think about that as this is unfolding at a larger time span than, say, 3 years, of the last 3 years of what's happened? How do you think about that in terms of responsibility and culpability? So, just how do we address that, and what's our responsibility as makers with that, in that space?
Yeah. Well, if I'm ever given evidence that tells me a machine is intelligent, I will change my tune. but I don't think we're there, and I don't think we're anywhere close to that, actually. So it is all the humans. You're right, it is all the humans who are using this tool and misusing this tool that we need to pay attention to, but tools need to be regulated so that people don't misuse them if they have shown repeatedly that they will misuse them without guidance. So my thought here is that we should focus on both sides, on the individual kind of grassroots movement of getting people to use this tool ethically, but the people who develop the tool have a lot of responsibility here, and it is on them to make sure that we can use their tool ethically.
I'm wondering, like, I completely agree with the idea that somebody shouldn't be able to make a deep fake of me. I should be able to say, you can't do that, right? And I'm kind of curious about your perspective and maybe even your opinion about why now? Like, why do we need the regulation now? For example, 25 years ago, I was paid a lot of money to make a CG copy of a real person for entertainment purposes, right? And I can do that right now. I can make a copy of you right now, not using AI, using other tools. Why weren't we concerned about that back then?
Because they weren't good enough.
Right.
Yeah, the CGI couldn't make something that was, to the average user, indistinguishable from a human, and that is the concern that we have now. If someone can't tell immediately on looking at a video of me that it's not me, that's a big issue. And I do want to say that the No Fakes Act is not just for AI. I mean, it's going to end up just for AI generated stuff because that's what's tricking people. But if CGI were good enough to create a realistic digital replica of me, it would also fall under the protection of the No Fakes Act, which is for any sufficiently good digital replica and not for an AI recreation. Thanks.
Thank you so much for this inspiring talk. I actually have two comments and questions for you. So one part is when you were talking about limits and concerns of AI, you mentioned how generative AI only aims for perceived accuracy. And how in the generated output, there are these kind of the biases, right, that are reflective of the reality, right? But then, just like looking at your summary of the history of creativity, that is also reflective of culture and intellectual hegemony of the Western world. So that was really the quintessential canon of how you talk about history that is all centered on Greek, Roman, and Europe, right? Rather than thinking about the global history where the contemporaneity doesn't really exist, right? So then, does AI, if we think of AI as centered around Europe and America, going to continue to perpetuate that history rather than thinking of that global, then does this mean that there will be different hegemony, like in AI world too, right? So that's one question I wanted to ask you.
Okay, I think maybe let's do that first. Yeah. So the question is about AI and like its global application and how it's trained on mostly Western cultures. Yeah, I mean that's a problem. I think that other countries are developing their own AI algorithms, which are going to be trained on more culturally specific data. But yeah, I agree that there is a bigger problem if you're using this AI to create art, which is typically a vehicle for culture, but it's only reduced to a few cultures. So I think I agree with you.
The second question is about teaching young generation of creatives to be versatile and familiar with these AI techniques. But by doing that, are we taking taking a risk of making just really cogs in a wheel rather than real creatives to stand out. That's my big concern. I wonder whether you actually have to train to be more, not using AI so that they can know how to do the research in archives and read the kind of materials that are not probably used for training AIs, right? So I was thinking about when the Vogue, the chief editor changed, instead of going with the trend, the new editor-in-chief or whatever decided to go the opposite, like more luxury, more, special than going with the flow of this kind of online presence. You need to constantly following and create new ideas. Right? So going back to more arts and crafts ideas, and how do you see the faculty members here trying to train the next leaders in the creatives have to do about this paradox?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. Obviously, I defer to the art educators in the room, but my hope would be that any sort of AI training comes later in the education. I would hope that the root, that the foundation of the teaching is in the old styles, and in doing things by hand, in seeing what people created before AI, and that way, when you introduce AI later, it is a supplement. It is an augmentation to what they have already developed in terms of skills.
I just want to follow up on the training, the bias, in terms of in terms of the bias around AI, and in terms of our history, and who is going to be able to preserve our history moving forward. I feel like there's a lot of whitewashing of history that's going on right now in the world that we live in. So I'm wondering if AI might be able to save us in terms of getting more to the truth of our history, because I don't think it's going to be so easy to whitewash so much of it away from a potential AI training, language that's been trained for these past years.
It would require a lot of intention on our part to let AI be that savior, because it's trained on data that comes from prejudiced reality. Unless we generate new data sets that don't have racism or sexism or homophobia in them, and then use that to train AI, it will perpetuate those prejudices.
I think just at the basic level of, did slavery exist in this country ever, yes or no?
Yeah.
Then honestly, we're moving to a no situation.
But think of where people get that information. They get that information from the internet, which is where AI is scraping its data from. Right. So if people have that perception, AI is also going to be trained in that perception. Over time. Yeah, we have to be, we have to really if we want AI to be this bastion of truth, we cannot use any old publicly available data to train it. Yeah.
All right, last question.
Hi, Dr. Moiya. Thank you for this today. I work in the federal government for 15 years, so I understand a lot of what you're talking about at the federal level.
Great.
I'm really wondering about this part has been a lot about the fears, right? And I'm wondering about how we turn that to the opportunities. And I'm thinking about how everything we create in the federal government is in the public domain, right? And we understand there's things that are copyrighted and things that people can use. Where do you see the opportunities, particularly with, we're going to have a generation that is growing up with AI, just like we've had a generation that grew up with the internet, how do you see that? Stay tuned.
I'm scared. I see studies like the one out of MIT about how over-reliance on ChatGPT and other Gen AI ruins our brains. It makes our recall worse. It trims all of our neural activity. We are making ourselves dumber by using this. And so there needs to be a real way to address this in schools, in some other social program. I'm not sure, but there needs to be a way to educate kids on the dangers and the good uses. And I really think that it should not be in schools until later, if ever. I'm a writer. I don't think people should be using it to write, and too many of the kids are. So, I don't know, going back to handwritten assignments in class, going back to verbal presentations, any way that we can, what's the word? Make analog our education again.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. McTier.